I'm Jen West, professional rebel of delight.
And I'm Dave Wiesdock, sage of creative scaffolding.
And this is Shadowcasting. So, Dave, you remember a few weeks ago we did a podcast on balance?
Oh, yeah. It was one of our more recent podcasts.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago. Well, I went back and I was going back through it, and I realized that we talked a lot about values and the importance of our values in finding life balance, but we didn't dig in. So I was thinking this week we dive into values, go deep, and see what we can churn up that might help our audience.
Oh, that sounds like a great idea.
All right. So I'm going to bring our audience back up to speed. If you haven't listened to the Balance podcast, go back. It's only a few episodes back. In that episode, we actually played around with physical balance so that we could get an idea of what balance felt like. And Dave was a good participant, and hopefully some of you in the audience decided to play along. Stand on one foot, see how it feels to change your balance, shift it, feel it in your body. And we hinted at the beginning about this play with work-life balance versus something radically different than that. And as we went along through balance, we started talking about the importance of having words that were value words, like curiosity, creativity, delight, purpose, loyalty, those kind of words that set the stage for how we interact with the world. And I came up with this way of looking at balance through the lens of how our body works. So when we think about physical balance, there are three internal systems that guide our balance, which are proprioception, which is the crazy one. It's how your body knows where parts of it are in space. So if you stick your arms out to the sides and you close your eyes, your finger can find your nose without your eyes open. Your body knows where it is in relation to itself in space. That's one of the systems. Another system is our visual system. And that's our ability to see out and obstacles and what's coming and take that information in. And then the third one is our vestibular system. And that's our inner ear. That's what gives us our physical balance, knowing where we are in space, whether we're upside down or right side up. It also has this really cool part that it keeps our eyes in focus as our head moves. So it just, vestibular is probably my favorite system. But
this feels like a day back in Cairo school.
Yeah. You're moving back, right? You're getting back into that feel.
Exactly.
Do you remember all these parts?
Oh yeah. This was a fun part to learn in chiropractic because, you know, when we adjust patients and stuff, we directly affect those parts of the nervous system. So that was a big part of what we were healing when we adjust patients and correcting is part of that balance and nervous system and making sure that the parts of the body all talk with each other. And I'll be curious to see if we can kind of play with that lens as you go on. So sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no, it's great because if your inner ear is off or if your proprioception is off, you can get dizzy and have those issues that just make life harder. So getting those systems working together is what really gives your body balance. It makes you comfortable in the world. You're not worried about falling. If you slip on ice, your body recovers itself because it knows where it is in space. It's really important for balance to have those three systems functioning as best they can. And they mostly work unconsciously. We don't recognize them until they're out of whack. And then we start getting dizzy or we become clumsy, or I don't know about you, Dave, but there are times when I've walked through a door and just like slammed my shoulder against the wall because it's just that much off. And it's like, ugh.
Oh yeah. Especially with the keratoconus I have now, it's very much like that much off.
Yeah.
I'll try to clear like a doorway or a desk or something, and I'll wake up in the morning with bruises on my hand or kind of on my shoulder because I'm like just that far off. And so I think my body knows where it's in space, but the visual is kind of off kilter. And so it just throws me off a little bit. And my body like can sometimes catch it, sometimes not. But
Yeah, you need that superpower of Daredevil, where you
ooh,
don't need your eyes.
yeah, well, I'm working on it.
So we can compensate. That's one thing to throw out there. And it's probably what we do in life. Here's how we mold this back into values. I think that instead of work life balance, it's just life balance. Work is a part of life. And when we try to separate those things, it gives two external ideas power over our life instead of our internal functioning systems. So we're trying to say leisure and family and recreation and just all the other stuff of life, eating, is this entire separate organism to work. And then we try to balance that. And that's just weird to me.
Yeah, I think when we talked about the balance podcast, it was a heavier focus on moving from a sense of value, because your values are what kind of guide your balance. As we were talking about, sometimes we think we made the right call or the right choice, and it just is ever so slightly off. Maybe it's a hindsight issue where we made a choice and then we look back and we're like, oh, that wasn't the right choice. Or maybe we make the choice and I run into a table or into the frame of a door because my vision is just a little off. Maybe we make a choice and it hurts us a little bit in some form or fashion. Maybe it causes a fight with a loved one or a family member, or maybe it leads to a disgruntled feeling at work. Or there are so many ways in which when we just slightly move out of our values, we run up against something that causes us a little bit of pain because we're out of balance. We're not quite in that center. I think for me, and tying this into the values, is that's where we end up getting hurt. When we make a decision that isn't quite in line with our values, where either our mind or our habits trick us into thinking we're in line with our values and we're not. And so I sometimes like to think personally that that's the universe or kind of the higher cosmic order of things kind of poking me and going, hey, Dave, you're almost there, but maybe let's just tweak it just a little bit. Let's focus on that value. Or you got two of your three main values, but there's just that one that's a little, you're making some concessions there that maybe you shouldn't. So it's really just this, if balance physically is the interplay between like our eyes, our ears, and kind of our brain, I think our values, our decisions, our choices, and kind of the way that we interact with our thoughts is how we maintain our values and our balance in our day-to-day life.
Right. It's one of three. The three internal systems that run our life balance are our purpose or mission in life. So if we know what that is, and we did a podcast on purpose as well, so that dives into that side, our ability to decide where we want to go. So our vision for the future and our values. And if we combine those three pieces together, our life becomes balanced. And it doesn't matter how often you're at work or how often you're at home or what you're doing with your family, you will find balance. And so today we've already done purpose. We're diving into values. So now with that very long introduction, this is where we're going to start. And we started last time when we were talking about balance, we talked about words that were important. But I think today, let's start at where do values come from? Where do we find them? We all have values, but they may not be ours. They may have been given to us originally.
I fully agree. I think values are important because they're a sort of compass. They guide us. But where the trick comes in is learning that there's kind of two ways we get the compass, right? We can either have a new compass where we go inside and find our own values, but sometimes there's inherited compasses. There's compasses that were given to us by social structures, family, religious values, those kind of things. And so I feel like for our listeners, there might even be some paradoxical values. I'm not quite sure where I want to go with this yet, but I just kind of wanted to preface it with that there's going to be values that come from within, and you feel those, right? When you're making a decision and you're weighing it internally, usually what you're weighing it against are your internal values. Where I think conflict sometimes comes in is when you weigh it against your internal values and maybe external values that were given to you.
Kind of overweight it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a funny thing because there are values that are instilled on us. Our parents have values that they want us to have. And so they teach those values, and those are very conscious in our minds. And we lose connection with what is actually our internal value. And so those external values override what is maybe best for our personal balance. This is where you as the audience really have to open up and explore and become extremely curious on where your values came from and why you hold them. And if you want to keep them, sometimes they mesh very well with who you are already. Sometimes they deviate. Yes, they're important. I mean, things like kindness, generosity, working hard, being exceptional, integrity. These are all values. You can get some from work. You got your list of what's important for the company, the value list of the company normally says integrity, responsibility. Those are values as well. But what do they mean? They're just words. Integrity, that seems like a given. But there are ones that are innate to you. And those are the ones you need to move from. Yes, integrity, important. But what drives you? What makes your purpose come alive? And that's what we're looking at today. So in exploring maybe the values that your church gave you, charity and giving to others, maybe your internal compass is driven by creativity and playfulness and creating for the sake of creativity, not necessarily others benefit from it, but that's not where your focus is, and you get distracted. And so really diving into those external values that were given to you and just letting them sit and marinate in who you are as a person.
To add to that, I kind of want to put like a verbal asterisk here and say, just because a value is external doesn't mean that that's still not a value for you or one of your top 3, 5, 10 values. The catch is where the value springs from, and learning to be aware of that and catching that is a very nuanced skill, because when you first start looking at values, it's very easy to just see them at their face value, pun intended, just looking at them very superficially. If you believe, for example, okay, let's take a less spicy one. Let's say responsibility. That's a good one. Responsibility could be given to you because you were, like me, the firstborn child. And so there's this social, not just family, but social expectation that as the firstborn child, you're going to take care of your siblings and you're going to be the responsible eldest sibling in the scenario. You're going to help around the house. You're going to be the first to probably go get a job, the first to start a career. You're doing a lot of firsts. And so there's this external value of responsibility and might resonate with a lot of people, but a really great question is to ask why. What about responsibility resonates with you? Is it because you were told that you needed to be responsible, or is it because you feel it from within? When you see something slacking because there's a lack of responsibility being given towards a certain issue or decision that needs to be made, are you like, I need to make this decision because I'm told I need to be responsible? That would be an external value. Or are you looking at this going, this needs to be addressed and I can do it. I can answer this question. When it comes from within, you feel this spring up like a wellspring from inside. That's how you know that responsibility is more of that internal value. And you'll see that the definition in this example didn't change. You're still handling the issue. What changed was the feeling. What changed was where the pressure was coming from. And I think that's why values are important and why this discussion is important. And I was talking to Jen about this before the call, in that I don't see a lot of discussion happening around values. And as our tagline and our goal of this podcast is to celebrate humanity, I don't feel like you can celebrate humanity without acknowledging values, because those go hand in hand. Values is what gives us our humanity. It's what makes us unique. It's kind of in our DNA. And I think it gets misapplied and a little misconstrued because our parents and our grandparents, et cetera, our lineage found their values that worked for them. And because it worked for them, they have this certain drive to share those values with us because they want us to succeed. And so there's this misapplication of going, well, these values work for me, therefore I'm going to make them work for you. And that's not really how we should approach values. It's not that those values aren't important. Again, they helped whoever imposed them upon us, but really values should come from within. They should be an internal drive, an internal factor that when we need to make decisions, we go inside and see what springs up inside of us, because that, when we acknowledge our decisions, our choices, our feelings about an issue, that's how we celebrate our humanity, and that's how we cast our shadow. Are we choosing to cast from within, or are we choosing to continue to impose from the external?
Yeah. And it's powerful as you start to dive into values and figure out which ones are actually yours and which ones aren't yours. Even with something like responsibility, I think people get that it's important to take responsibility for things. And it may not be your top value. It may not be 1, 2, or 3. It may not even be in your top 10, but it's still something that you feel inside yourself and is useful. And if you live by your values, it'll turn up because you'll become responsible. It starts to flow out of you from that way. When it's imposed upon you, it's done grudgingly. And here's another way to tell your values from somebody else's. I like that you went this way, Dave. Do you feel resentment or blame when you're diving into the value you need to dive into? It's probably not yours if you feel like you have to, or somebody told you that's what you should care about. With a value, it should rise from within and you'll want to. It's something you'll want to create more of. And here's the thing, when I was looking for my values, my top value is truth. And if you think about other things like making a difference or respect for life, those seem more important. It's like, who cares about truth, especially like the higher objective truth? Does that even exist? But I am driven by that. I seek through that. I get curious about other people to find their truth. It's the top driver of where I come from, and I can't help it. And if I start to think I'm wrong or bad because truth is a higher value to me than generosity or making a difference in the world or respect for life, then I'm not going to honor myself. I'm going to kind of be fake and off, and just then balance goes off. And then you think you got to work harder and not spend time with your family, or you're failing in some way. And so really diving into those things. I mean, my second value is delight. Again, wait, being delightful is more important than caring about Dave? No, my delight includes Dave.
Yeah. So I don't want to totally segue from the flow and where we're going here. And I'm totally going to segue.
Segue.
So I really like how you brought this up, because again, in our discussion of values, I said it earlier, it's nuanced. There's a unique perspective to get to the values that come from within, and it takes time to figure out. And what I mean by that is my number one value is curiosity. It's been there for about a year or two now, sitting in the top spot. And I mean, it's probably been there forever, but been in the top spot in the sense of like I've acknowledged it, right? And part of what I think happened was I always had curiosity as a value, but I misapplied it in the sense of problem solving. And what I mean by that is, going back to the responsibility example, when I grew up, I was told that I had to be responsible and solve the issues, taking care of my siblings, helping around the house. And it was an expectation of being the older sibling. And so part and parcel with that was solving problems. What are we eating for dinner tonight? Who do I need to delegate what chores to based on what my siblings can handle? Because they were obviously a lot younger. And so I learned at a very young age how to figure out all these moving pieces. And I was told from the outside in that meant that I was good at problem solving. I remember my first boss told me I was a really good problem solver. I was really good at bringing problems to him. And then over time, he made me a really good problem solver. But that wasn't the value. And the reason that wasn't a good value is because it was external. It was all about the pressure of everyone else. I was only solving problems because other people were bringing them to me. I wasn't driving that, if that makes sense. And again, this is very nuanced. It's not that I wasn't solving problems, because I was, but the problems were coming from outside. They were driven by the needs of other people, probably other people whose values were needing to be checked. Where my value came in and what made me a good problem solver was the fact that I used my curiosity. When a problem came up, I was going into the questions. How do I solve this? What solutions are available? Where can I go to get an answer? I always take a kind of that nugget of what's being presented to me, and I expand it. And I expand it by looking at all the different angles of a problem, all the different solutions. And I start to kind of look at the big picture and what builds towards that answer. And that all comes from an internal drive of curiosity, because I love figuring things out and looking at them and asking questions about it and really driving at an issue. I just don't like taking something at a superficial value. I think I'm bringing this up to highlight for the audience that you can have a value that's kind of close to what resonates for you, but not quite there. And I think that that's the beauty of what we're sharing with this podcast is we're not saying that you don't know your values or that your values are wrong, because I don't want anyone to think that. It's just that we're asking you to kind of take a step back, take some space from where you think your values are, and really dig into them a bit. Is this something that resonates with you and comes up from within when you're faced with a problem? Or is this something that you just feel a pressure because it's this voice or this external thought or person that's asking you to do something or to solve it a certain way? And that takes a lot of discernment, I feel.
Yeah, it does. It takes a lot of time. I've been working with values since I did my Gestalt program back in 2011. And there's still nuance growing on the word that I choose to be the word for the value. Like, it's only recently that I chose delight. It was play for a while. It was authenticity before that. And then I realized authenticity was this generalization of me being me, which I realized I was more playful, and so it was an evolution from there. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to find your values, and there are ways to find it. Make a list of a whole bunch of values, words that you care about, and then start ranking them in an order. But here's a nuance that I want to give to people. Lots of people will say, my family is my top value. And I'd like to challenge that. And this comes, I think, originally from Tony Robbins' work. And he has two versions. There's means values and there are ends values. And the means value is like family. Your family gives you the experience of living in your end value. So if you think about, okay, what do I get? What do I feel when I'm with my family? For some people, they'll say, I feel security. I feel connection. I feel playful and adventurous because I'm with people that I'm comfortable with. So there's like a level of comfort. Each of those words are end values. By being with your family, you get that. Some people are like, I value money. Well, what does money give you? Does it give you security or does it give you freedom? Those are two radically different end values. You're going to live your life way different based on that.
Yeah.
If it's security, you're going to be in your home. You're going to make everything homey and good, and you're going to have great decoration because you got the money to do it. If you're an adventurer, you may not have a home, you may be not traveling constantly. So these are things to keep in mind as you start building what your value words are. Family's not your value. Family is a means to your value. So keep that in mind as you go.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think I want to kind of take that and segue that into, so we've kind of talked about that values are important. I don't think there's really much to argue on that front. I do think that we've kind of gotten to the nuance now of an external value given to us versus an internal value that kind of comes from within. So you brought up things like family versus money versus freedom versus, adventuring, all could kind of be a means or an ends value. But for the audience listening, how do we take those values and kind of like make them our own? Because the more unique and personal the value feels, not only will it be the easier to remember them, but I think it also makes it easier to move from it, because when it's personal and unique to us, it pulls at us in a different way. How do we help the audience kind of move towards figuring out when a value is a means value versus an ends value? And also when we find those ends values, how do we make sure that they're kind of unique to us and our own?
Yeah. So once I've created a list of value words, I define them. And as you define those words, if the definition has other value words in it, those are probably the real value behind it. So if I say something like family is important to me and you define it, family is my connection to the world and they make me feel secure and safe. The values are actually connection, security, and safety. And so you want to pull those out. And if you do them for a list of 10, you'll start to see repeating words. You can also go in your general language. As you're talking day to day, I use the word play a lot. Go play with that. Go see how that feels. Or I feel like I'm seeing your truth, or what's true for you. These words come up a lot in my vocabulary. And you just start to feel that those are what you're clinging to. They're what you're making your decision by, those types of words. And lastly, if you play with Enneagram or Myers-Briggs, there are so many value words for each character. So jump into those, see which ones kind of hit a nerve,
Oh, okay. So for our audience listening, here's another really cool way that you can find values. I'm going to talk about my number 2 value. Another way that you can find values, and this is going to tie into one of our other podcasts that we did, one of my favorite podcasts that we've done so far, which is the inner roundtable, or kind of your inner roundtable. So if you haven't listened to that podcast yet, please go take a listen to that, because this ties into it. And so one of the other ways that you can learn what your values are by seeing the type of people that you admire, the type of people you look up to. Because if there is a common thread between them, and write out, again, what you admire about each person, you're probably going to find similar words, just like Jen mentioned about if you were to just list the value words themselves and define them. If you were to list the people you admire and define what you admire about them, you might find overlapping words, and that would be another kind of value to go look at. So for example, a lot of the people on my inner roundtable that I admire are Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, Adam Grant, Theodore Roosevelt, even fictional Captain Pike, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, because I'm a big Star Trek nerd. There's these external people that I admire, and just taking a very quick glance at it, when I look at all of these characters, one of the words that comes to mind is radical acceptance. All of these unique individuals practiced a value of radical acceptance. And to that point, I didn't understand that was one of my values until this random occurrence happened where I was watching A Strange New World on Paramount Plus. Shameless plug, because they're not sponsoring us, but maybe they will now. But anyways, I was watching that, and in one of the episodes, Captain Pike talks about radical empathy. And it really just tugged at me in a way that was more than just a TV show. I followed that curiosity because, again, that's my top value. And so when something tugs at me, I get curious. And so in living in my value, and why I bring this up, is because my value led me to another one. And that's the idea here. The more you find and focus on your values and the more you make them your own, the more you're able to uncover your own internal values as you go inward. And so by looking at these people I admire and by a random occurrence of a TV show that just kind of had the right sauce of words, I was able to find something that really is true to me. And it's this idea of radical acceptance and radical empathy. When I look at people that I admire, I can see where this value came out of these individual people. I just kind of wanted to offer that as another way. So there are a lot of ways, as Jen was sharing, that we can find these values and make them our own. How do you find your value? Do you know what your values are, first of all? Do you kind of get a sense of if some values are external versus internal? And more importantly, given kind of the list that Jen and I have given, whether you look at your Myers-Briggs, your Enneagram, whether you make a list of your values and kind of define them, or whether you look at people you admire, what are some ways that you can find your values? And are you inspired by any of these ideas to go and find your values? Or are there ways that we didn't mention that you can maybe go find your values? And please share those with us. We'd love to hear them.
Yeah. And as you're going through this, I would love to hear more ways of finding your values because you just can't have enough. Mm-hmm. It's so hard and each person is so individual. It takes time. It takes a partner sometimes. I think, Dave, yours kind of started to mold together using Simon Sinek's tool of start with why. Yep. And that helped too. So these other tools that are adjacent can get you to your value words.
Yeah. Simon Sinek's why, that why assignment that you and I did together took me to a place where I realized that actually that's where my epitaph came from, the scaffolding. It's part of my why, creativity. I want to help people build the scaffold around their creative ideas so that they can make whatever they're trying to create better and improve the world around us. But from all that came this idea of curiosity because that's the driving factor of my why. And that's how it kind of got to that first spot.
Which is beautiful. So use whatever tool works for you. Now I kind of want to take it and how do you use your values? How do you make them applicable in the world? You need to build rules around them. Lots of people make their value high in the sky. You have to do amazing things for your value to be lived. It has to be extreme. And we have control of this. It's the rules that we apply to our values that makes us feel like we're living our life in a balanced way. So let's take truth, my top value for fun. If I said, I am only living my value of truth, if I dig in and find the exact facts and numbers and whatever piece is the truest of true ever, I'm always going to feel lacking. I am not living my value. If I don't become enlightened and I see the truth, I'm not living my value. That puts it out of the world. You're aspiring to a value instead of living your value. So you want to create rules that make it extremely easy for you to live your value constantly. So I am, and it can be something as easy as a statement is every time I'm living that value, whatever value it is. So mine for truth could be something as easy. Every time that I listen deeply to what somebody's saying, I'm living in truth because I'm trying to find their truth. Every time I see the world as it is, I'm living in my truth. I'm finding truth. And you just make it super easy to get to that point. For creativity, Dave could say, if I make a masterpiece or build a $1 million business, I am creative. And that's going to make him feel really bad about his value.
I was just about to say, yeah, creativity, I guess creativity is on probably my top 5. But, creativity, it definitely is now that I'm thinking about it. Wow. Huh. See, we're even doing work on the podcast.
Creative scaffolding, that's what it came to. I was looking at your name.
I was like, of course it's in my top values. What am I thinking? Creativity can come up in so many different ways. At least when I was younger, when I thought creativity, it was artwork. Because when you did creative stuff at school, you were doing projects for your parents. You were construction paper, paper mache, coloring, whatever. But creativity is so much more than that. And so I get to be creative at work when I'm coming up with formulas in an Excel sheet, which people go, okay, that's a formula. How's that creative? It's creative in the sense of I get to decide how and when it's used, where it's used, and what formula I'm going to use to create a solution for whatever problem's coming up. And that requires creativity. Also doing this podcast, that's creative because this is a different kind of creativity. And so that's where the values really start to shine. When you find your value and you start doing the things that align with your values, you feel I don't want to say a promise, but you feel a better sense of life and exuberance almost.
Yeah. Anytime your value comes out and you recognize it, you see values are the choices you make, not at the big T in the road where it's do this or do that. It is every single why. Am I going to the store or am I going home? And you can always ask, which one will fulfill my value more?
Yes.
And every choice is based on your values, whether you are aware of it or not.
Yes. And I want to add too, you will know that you're moving from your values because there is a certain sense of, it's not easy, EASY, but there is a certain sense of ease, EASE, with it. Because when you move with your values, at least for me, it's almost like taking like a big, nice, deep breath after you've been taking short, shallow breaths. There's this certain sense of release or this, release when you are moving from your values because your body and your whole being breathes into it. And that is, for me, an indicator that I have found a value. The reason I bring this up is because one of the things I don't think we hit on a ton on our podcast is that while we are discussing very mental or even ethereal topics, like I can't touch a value, right? I can't touch curiosity. I can't touch delight. Yeah.
No.
You can't touch those things.
Feel delight, but yes.
Right. The idea is that you can feel those things. They come from feeling. And the best way to feel your values is to go out and experience life. Don't do it in isolation on a piece of paper. I mean, you can do that to start. So what I would recommend is, for example, if you decide, okay, I'm going to write down the top 20 values that come to mind and define them. And then you start circling all the words that overlap and you kind of condense it down, let's say, to a list of even 3 values. Take those, have them on your phone on a note that you can easily access. And then as you move through your life, as you move through, let's say, a week, look at them. When you make a decision, like Jen said, simple as going to the grocery store, which of your values aligns with that? If it's family, okay, you're feeding your family for that week. So you start to build a picture of how and where these values show up, and you can really get into the embodiment of, am I living this value or do I think I'm living this value? Because at the end of the week, you might realize, okay, I've done 17 things for family, but I haven't touched radical acceptance. If that, that's my value. If I haven't touched that for a week, that's probably not in my top 3 values, because if they're in your top 3, you're probably touching those multiple points during a day, let alone a week. And so you start to build this picture. And again, you're embodying it. It's not just some exercise that you're doing on a piece of paper. You're going out and experiencing it and seeing if those values are actually moving you. Not only are you living them, but are they moving you towards whatever your goals are?
Yeah. And I want to bounce back to the means and the end values. Let's say you have lived with the value, thinking it's your end value of family. You do everything for your family and you're trying and it's just hard sometimes. But then you realize that connection is the actual value underlying what you do for your family. And if you start moving from that for your family, it'll change. Being back at the store, if you're going through the store and you're thinking about the meals you're going to get for your family and you're deciding, well, am I going to get this fast food or not fast food, a frozen dinner that I can cook quickly for the kids? Or am I going to get this bunch of fruit and chop it up? And then you can make the decision. If I get the frozen food versus chopping up some fresh fruit, I could bring more connection with the fresh fruit. The kids could help me chop it. I could put it out on the table and they would just eat it as they come. It would bring them together around the table to eat the fresh fruit. That's going to create more connection than if I feed and take care and service my family by giving them a frozen meal.
Yeah.
Yes, this gets it done, but I want connection. And you'll start to see those patterns start to play over and over. Are we going out? Am I taking my kids to go see a movie, or am I taking them out for a hike in nature? Both of those are perfectly acceptable options. It depends on what your value is, which way you go. And then you start caring about your kids' values and you start to nurture those. And that's where we're getting into our celebrating our humanity. Because once you start to see how values work, I know for myself, I start to reach out into those values and try to enthusiastically guide them more to their own values, not to mine, just because I care about the world super magical truth. My son doesn't. That's not his thing. His thing is like facts and figures and stuff like that. You know, I haven't really dove in. He's only 14, but it's starting to bubble up what he values.
Yeah. And just kind of my last note is don't get overly attached to your values either. I think that can be a pitfall here is you finally find one that kind of comes from within and you embody it. It may change. The definition may change. I mean, like Jen was just sharing with hers, it used to be authenticity, then play, and then I guess it's play now, right?
Delight now.
Delight, that's right. Thank you. So it changed 3 times, but the energy stayed the same. It's just she got more definition, more understanding of it as she went out into the world and played with it. So that's something that I'd like to share because we talked about family as a value a lot here. And some people, I mean, everyone is in a different living situation, right? Some of you might be listening and you might be still living with your parents. Some of you might be listening to this and you're empty nesters and everyone in between. So this is where looking at our values is important and understanding the driving factors of our values and whether it's that ends or means. Because while family might be your value, I'd really encourage you, or any generic value that's like family, money, freedom, adventure, those big buzzwords that you see. If you were to like look up in Google a list of 50 values, when you find those, really dig into why it resonates with you specifically. And I'm just going to end it with that because when my partner and I parent, we parent very differently, even though family would quote unquote be a value to us. How we parent, I think, is more representative of our value than the fact that we're being a parent and as part of a family unit, if that makes sense. So our value is what drives how we do the family rather than family being the driving value.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to end it there with that.
Yeah, we have shot a ton of information at you. You can tell we're passionate about it. We keep going up. My voice has probably been like in the rafters because when I get excited, I talk a little bit higher. But sit with it, play with it. Let us know what you think about this episode and see if it starts to mold your balance a little better, knowing this decision-making tool.
Yeah. And as always, make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. Give our podcast a share. Be sure to comment and let us know where you find your values are. And if you've experimented with them, where you maybe have learned something new from this podcast and how it helped you get a better understanding of your values. And as always, make sure to give us a like and we'll hear from you next time.
See ya.